welcome back to another devlog. This is number 44. So in the beginning of the week, I was running in last week. I was building this room. I was running into a lot of FPS issues because there's a lot of stuff in here, and I was running shadows and all that. And I got concerned. I wanted to go back and revisit my optimization solution that I did in the prototype. And I really wanted to go back and get it right, kind of figure out, how to optimize lights correctly, especially when it comes to baking. So I went and set up a little test scene so I could really understand, all the differences between baking direct light um, and baking indirect. And so I tried out Unity's light baking again and my own my bakery package, and I actually had a couple breakthroughs in understanding. And so my goal was to vastly improve optimization by baking in direct light and direct shadows. Um, this works, but the problem comes when you want to use dynamic shadows alongside it, like for a character. There's simply no way that I know of to support this in the Unity engine. So to cast a dynamic shadow alongside baked direct lighting, the real-time light has to illuminate the ground further and causing this kind of double illumination. Um, So this has the effect of making the shadows half strength for the dynamic shadow, the character, and as well as the baked shadows. This is the best possible result I can get, and no amount of tweaking or configuration can produce a more desirable result. It simply isn't possible that I know of. AI doesn't know, YouTube or Google doesn't know. So I settled for limiting the environment objects I cast shadows on instead of everything, and bake just bake in the indirect bounce lighting. Um, so baking the indirect lighting, you pretty much get that for free. There's no cost to that, but in order to get more FPS, you have to optimize. You kind of have to confine or constrain how which objects can cast shadows and which ones are not. So you kind of have to selectively choose which ones instead of just setting it to all. So that works, and I can employ some optimization, um, and I can actually, instead of it being not optimized at all, I actually tested it out and I was able to get some sort of light baking in there. And I employed my usual mess baking and occlusion culling, just to see my previous solution on an actual filled production um, environment. And I got some decent optimization out of it. So I wanted to see the actual result of like what an optimized scene looks like in an actual build. But since I added a lot more packages and prefabs and shaders, the actual shader compilation this time took 6 hours to do. But I finally got a build working, and it was a decent 90 FPS for the scene. So, um, but the only issue was I was having some VSync screen tearing that I wanted fixed. Uh, I was able to turn on VSync um, from the built-in menu, but for some reason it was capping the frames at 30 frames per second, which wasn't ideal. I wanted to have at least 60 frames a second because I think that's the standard, and my monitor is 60 frames per second. 30 frames per second, it's playable, but it feels rough, especially when I'm achieving a consistent 90 with my optimizations. So I didn't really know what was going on there. Um, on Tuesday, I kept working out testing builds and trying to figure out, you know, why I can do 90, but when I turn VSync on, it sets it to 30. What's going on here? So, I was messing around with like a FRS upscaler, like trying to figure out if I could squeeze some upscaling. I was thinking that, the system the system was just setting it to 30, because it just couldn't handle it. But further testing, if I turned off my real-time shadows, I could get like a lot more frames than I do a build there. But when I turn VSync on, it still goes to 30. So that it told me that it wasn't really an optimization problem. Something else was going wrong because it was still capping at 30 frames per second. Well, digging into the code, the actual code I didn't write, the menu UI framework, it had vsync equals 2, which it pretty much, so this is how it works. So if you achieve 90 and you turn vsync on, if vsync equals 1, it'll go to the so you can set a target frame rate, and if you say target frames is 60 frames a second, and you say vsync 1, it'll cap it at 60 frames if it can reach above that. If it's below 60 frames, then it'll go automatically down to 30 to have that, to match the refresh rate of the screen. So mine was set at 2, which means it's gonna go down to 60, and then it's gonna half that, which is 30, which is unnecessary. So I set it to 1. It was going at 90. I just have to make sure I maintain above 60 frames per second. Otherwise, it will, in order to VSync, it will go down to 30. So as soon as I got it up to 60, it was nice and smooth, and it was a very desirable result, and I could work with that, and no more screen tearing. So that's definitely worthy of production. After I got satisfied with all my, optimization, and that I got satisfied that I could apply the solution across my entire level in the future, I went ahead and moved back over to building out this scene here, room 3, and needless to say, this was the majority of the work. I like to, this is most of the same work that I've been doing for the last couple weeks, and saying that it's a grind is an understatement. I've kind of shifted from solving like system coding and functionality issues, like problem solving, into this kind of repetitive new process where it's very manual. You kind of have to, manual and creative, where you take a empty specification and you're just kind of creatively adding props here and there. And so I started at the beginning of the week where this whole room was empty, and I had to fill it up, with, I had the original ideas of like a cell block kind of deal, but since the room was so large vertically, I decided to add some verticality with a actual little walkway here, which I thought was a good idea. And this gives not only the ground floor multiple paths through to the goal, but also you can go on the walkway around and avoid and come through the other side of the room to exit in an alternate route. But this, this whole room took a couple days of just placing assets, tweaking, endless, it's like building a huge Lego set. You set the piece, and then you have to rotate it just so everything matches and looks fine with the walls and basically everything. And just, it's a real balancing act where you want to put enough stuff in the room and kind of model out your lanes for the stealth gameplay, and you want to keep filling it up until it kind of feels right, where there's no big empty spots, and like, you know, there's enough stuff filling the room, but to keep the environment interesting, so there's not a lot of just empty space. And you want to break up these big empty spaces with like random organic stuff, but at the same time you don't want to go overboard and, you know, have too much stuff going on. You know, you kind of want to strike that balance, you know, where it, you know, it feels like there's really not too much to add. It's like decoration. So there came a point when finally at last, you know, this whole room was looking good, and I was ready to repeat the process over again. This was about Thursday, and on the next dang room, you know, this next sector. So again, same manual process, laying out the floors, do for the specification, and it's gotten so repetitive, this whole process of building a sector out, where um, the actual creative process of detailing is not necessarily repetitive, because you're going in and you're kind of creatively like, okay, I'm gonna do this one, or just kind of. But the initial process of setting up the floors, the walls, the confiner, testing out the transitions between hallways, it just, I mean, it's just like, it's just a grind, and but it's necessary. It's a lot of manual labor, but it has to be done. Like, the whole objective is to get the prototype from existing on this simple tiled app into actual Unity with at least a level of production detail that you can kind of get a real feel for the, you know, the as close to as close to as possible as what the real game will look like, to where you can adjust and make more fine-tuned decisions. So got the confiners in, started working on the walls. I was starting to, at the end of the week, I got the initial detail walls all set up, but there's still more adjustments, and I have to go through another detail pass and add random things like pipes, and I added exterior rooms, but, you know, like I did with the other room, pretty much just randomly add little you know, things in the room, and maybe a pipe here or there, kind of add you know, maybe a box in the corner, just to kind of fill it out a little bit more, instead of just having these walls, until it's kind of organic like this room. And just repeating the process. This whole area here is a sector, this loop, and then this area is a new sector here. So I do all my gameplay prototyping here to kind of figure out where he's gonna go, where are the paths, where are the objects. And at the end of the week, I kind of took a break from the manual labor and kind of looked at this again and say, am I going in the right direction? I haven't really finalized the actual placement of different power-ups and resources and keys and doors, but I think the general structure of this first level is good enough to keep going with. Things might change around. I might change a key location, but the real estate of the rooms and the layout is still valid, even if I wanted to change a couple things around, if to make more sense in the actual gameplay flow. But that's the different stage. Once I have the level built, then I can test the gameplay and say, oh, this doesn't really work. Maybe if I change this around. But I just need to do the manual labor of building this thing, because, you know, you don't really know if it's a workable design until you actually start gameplay testing within the level. It's kind of like a catch-22. So I spent a little bit of time looking at it. My initial design for the entire level seems to be valid. I've double checked this, and it seems to be valid for the most part. Doesn't mean it's going to be fine-tuned, but I think the actual flow and progression matching up with the level design, I think it works pretty decently, especially for my first run at it. So I'm just going to go with it. Um, so, I mean, like I said last week, if I do all these, all this real estate for level 1, it's gonna be taking a good considerable amount of time, you know. And this has to be at least an hour or more of gameplay with all the stealth encounters and stuff. So, but kind of seeing how far I've gotten in 3 weeks time and what I need to do, I'm gonna be pretty much at this level for some time, and I think by the end of the week, it is so the the manual labor of placing all these, you know, even with my tools, like at the end of the week, I just feel like, I mean, it's just, yeah, it's like a marathon of like monotonously. I have to turn on a podcast and you just like each one of these little things, you're just adjusting the rotation, the scale to fit, and it's just like on and on and on and on. It never ends. And I mean, it feels good when you've got it done, like this room, but it's just so much work doing these environments, and it has to be done. So I'll keep doing it, but I think my plan is to actually, whenever I get kind of burnt out of, like, you know, after the 20th hour of placing wall tiles in rotation, I think I'm going to actually try to switch to, like I did at the beginning of this week, you know, switch to another topic and maybe spend a few hours working on some feature that I want to, just to switch gears, just to keep it fresh, because I just can't, you know, plow through, you know, 25 hours of just, you know, level construction. I kind of have to break it up a little bit. Maybe, you know, solve a, you know, add a new feature or solve a new problem that I see that's become apparent, you know, and then come back to this after I've done that after a bit, you know, kind of break it up a bit. That's probably the way to do it. But yeah, these I think my estimation of this whole thing, we're looking at least a couple months to build all this out for certain, especially considering the rate of how far I've come in like 3 weeks. It's considerable, but at this scale, like it's going to be, so, you know, at least one or two, at least 2 more months before I get this whole level completed. So, and since the work is so, it's so, it's so repetitive, and I'm pretty much doing the same thing. I'm not really solving new problems or challenges. I think, you know, my devlogs are going to be a little bit shorter. I can highlight the new features and problems I've solved, but most of the, you know, I'll just start to repeat myself. Like, yep, I built another sector. Yep, I detailed another sector. It's like, you know, same thing as I did last week. So I'm just going to discuss any new problems or challenges I solved, not necessarily talk about, yep, new sector. There'll be a lot more to talk about when I actually start gameplay testing the game design inside these rooms. But until there, it's just, you know, it's just digging a ditch and you know, a lot of manual labor, and but it has to be done because a game is not a game without levels. So you know, next week and the week after that, for months to come, is the grind. And yeah, don't don't let anybody tell you it's easy. Oh, I can create a video game, or I can have AI do it for me. No, it's like by the end of this, my index finger is going to be very sore from the amount of clicking I've accomplished. So that said, I'm going to cut it short. Only 20 minutes today. 20 minutes this session. And we will talk to you later.